All righty. So, welcome in to our McKinney-Vento Deeper Dive into Practice training. Today is October 19th. I'm not so sure when that happened, but this is the third time that we are offering this training topic content. If you've been to this training topic last year, content is similar, but we did change some of the sections. Yeah, thanks for joining. So today, there are two of us presenting. We may have some other coworkers in the room supporting in the chat, but Kayla and I will be your main presenters today. My name is Joey Heilman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Education Strategy Specialist with Building Changes. I'll pass it to Kayla.
Good morning. My name is Kayla Blau. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a consultant with Building Changes. And my background is with survivors of domestic violence experiencing homelessness, as well as with McKinney-Vento departments up in the Seattle area.
And I just want to clarify in the chat, I was like, this is session 3 of 4. They are not a sequence, like you have to come to 1, 2, 3, 4. It's pretty much the same topic. We just want to offer it enough times for more people to come. So sorry for that confusion. And thank you, Kayla. So before we get too much further today, we want to make sure that we are doing our land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still inhabit the area today. Building Changes is on the lands of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. That is also where I am presenting from today. So we're going to, Kayla just dropped the link in the chat for you to see where whose native land you are on, and we'll have an opportunity later for you to also share that in the chat. Couple of housekeeping things. So if you are seeking PD enroller clock hours, I need to be sure that your name in Zoom is the same as your name in PD enroller. That will be very helpful when I'm working with my OSPI partner to get attendance logged. So please make sure your name is the same if you're seeking clock hours. Kayla just dropped the link to the SurveyMonkey in the chat. That is for after the training. And I wanted to make sure you all had the link ahead of time in case you have to log off. So that survey is for after the training. If you are seeking clock hours, you will have to do the PD enroller survey instead of the SurveyMonkey, and that will be through PD enroller once attendance is logged. Normal Zoom etiquette, please make sure you're muted when you're not speaking. Take bio breaks as needed. We will have a short break in the middle. There is a live transcript available. You can hide or enable those subtitles and transcript. It is auto created, so it is not spot on. My apologies for that. And then we're going to be asking you to use the reaction buttons throughout. Please give us a thumbs up, give us a clap, when you agree with something. Give it, yeah, we love, sometimes you can pick a random emoji. That's always fun too. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to pop in, ask a question and speak. Also, please use the chat. We will be monitoring it, trying to answer questions as best we can. We may not get to every question or have every answer, but we'll sure as heck try to figure out who has an answer if we don't. All right, and we'll do just a quick check-in today. So first step, please put in the chat your name, pronouns if you're comfortable, the district or organization you're joining from today, your role, and whose lands you're on. So while everyone is typing that, the next part of our check-in is trying to get a feel for kind of what the familiarity with McKinney-Vento is in the room. So we have the reaction options here. There are, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, kind of in like the screenshot I have here, hit that little reactions button. You'll see all these pop up. So we're looking for the clapping. If you're an expert, you're like, I've been in this role for years. I know it like back of my hand. That's awesome. Thumbs up is like, I'm familiar, but I still have a lot to learn. And the like kind of, oh, shocked face is maybe you're brand new to the McKinney-Vento world. For some people, it's McKinney who. And you said what? So welcome in. I'd love to see those popping up. I'm seeing a few thumbs up. Couple thumbs up, yeah. And with that, I also want to recognize that when we're in these training spaces, we have such a wide variety of experience in the room. So for some of you, you might be in it thinking, this is all like, this is all refresh for me. I've learned this years ago, like this was a pretty basic training, and other folks would be like, this is all brand new. Wow, I learned so much. So just bear with us as we're straddling that learning. And also, please, if you have a lot of experience, please share it with the room. We would love for others to hear that as well. All right, seeing things come in, and feel free to use those reaction buttons throughout. A little bit about us at Building Changes. Not going to spend too long here, but we are a nonprofit working with and alongside communities across Washington state to explore the intersections of systems serving young people, students, and families experiencing homelessness. Mission, vision, values, all up on the screen. I like this little Venn diagram we got, kind of shows this the special place we hold in this work. Also want to be sure that I'm highlighting that racial equity is at the center of everything we do at Building Changes. So we bring in a targeted universalism lens coined by John A. Powell to our work, and this acknowledges equity rather than equality. So we no longer believe that everyone should receive the same level of support, but believe in prioritizing the needs of those most marginalized. And by doing so, there is a universal benefit. So to be clear, this is not about preference. This is about acknowledging that people are situated differently and have varying needs. This is just kind of showing the context that we're coming into in Washington state. So from a 2019 study that we did that showed that 6 out of 10 students in Washington state experiencing homelessness are students of color. So really just thinking about that disproportionality that our students of color are facing. How did we get here today? We have a contract with OSPI. They have brought us in to deliver a training series over a 2-year period, 7 different topics, 4 times each. We have a training every other week right now, so come hang with us every other week. And we're excited to continue our partnership with OSPI. All right, quick look at our agenda today. So we'll be doing a quick McKinney-Vento refresher like I talked about earlier. We've got all different experience levels in the room, so it's important to make sure we all have that same foundation. We're going to be going through a case-by-case approach. So how we kind of got to our topics today is we attended the OSPI annual trainings, and we're kind of looking at what questions were arising in the chat, what discussions were happening, and where it seemed like there was maybe a little bit of hunger for more, and that's where we came to today. So we'll be doing case-by-case approach, talking a little bit about RVs and mobile homes when it comes to eligibility, thinking about community connections, working with unaccompanied youth. We'll have that short break. And then we actually are very excited to have a building point of contact from Tacoma School District joining us to share a little bit about his role as a building point of contact. Some of you in the room may also be building points of contact. And yeah, so if you have questions about building points of contact, start thinking about that now. We will have Kyle in later. And then we'll have some time for breakout rooms and group discussion. Here's our objectives. Not gonna spend too long on these. They're, oh, well, that was really quick. So I'm PD and Roller. We hope you guys get a lot out of this today. Any questions before we dive in? All right, we're diving in. Off to you, Kayla.
Thanks, Joey, and good morning, everybody. So as Joey said, and based on the chat, it looks like there is a whole range of experience levels. So please feel free to come off mute, share your wisdom with the group, put in the chat, whatever works for you. But we're just going to do a quick overview of McKinney-Vento. So it is a federal law that supports the rights of students experiencing homelessness and ensures immediate enrollment and educational stability for students experiencing homelessness. We know that it's a very underfunded mandate, and that because of that, sometimes the staffing needs and the needs of our unhoused neighbors don't quite add up, especially across the state. This can look really different. We know some larger districts have a team of dedicated McKinney-Vento staff that are available to connect folks with services. And in some smaller districts, it might be tacked on to another role. So like a 0.2 FTE tacked on to, you know, something else. And so based on funding and just the size and needs of the communities, this can be a really difficult federal mandate to enact. And so I just want to give props where props are due to all of you who are on the ground making this work happen with really limited resources. And the next slide goes into just the main tenets of McKinney-Vento educational supports and protections. So the law allows immediate school access, meaning that if a student starts experiencing homelessness or becomes homeless in the middle of a school year, then they have the right to continue attending their school of origin so that their education is not disrupted. And that includes transportation to that school of origin, along with school stability, support for academic success, which includes some tutoring support or some, you know, tailored supports to get students up to speed and have them have equal access to resources as their housed peers. It should be child-centered, and they should be, you know, the family should be centered in their decision-making of what school would be best for their student to attend. And all districts have a liaison and a building point of contact for each school, which we will get into a little bit later. And we'll also talk about the importance of community partnership a bit later as well. All right, next slide. So the eligibility is something that we're going to dive into a bit today because it can be a bit tricky, but it really is just children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. We know, you know, traditionally this might look like staying in shelters or in tents or in cars, anywhere that's not meant for, you know, human habitation, but it also can look like being doubled up, staying with family and friends, maybe couch surfing, crashing with this auntie for a while and then this cousin for a while. We know that doubled up population makes up about 75% of students experiencing homelessness, you know, on average across the nation. It will obviously look different in each community. But it can also look like living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, which we'll talk a bit more about later on today as well. And really anywhere that doesn't have adequate accommodations like running water and a fixed place where students know that that's where they're going to sleep every night and have a stable place to go.
So I just dropped in the chat a link to the NACE FAQs, the National Association for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth. I think I got that. So this is a really helpful resource. It has not been updated for a little while. We're really hoping they're coming out with a new one soon, but just want to make sure you all have that on your radar.
Thanks, Joey. And so again, just those 4 pieces or 3 pieces of eligibility. So if you run into a situation where you're not sure if a family is eligible or not, you can fall back on these. So having a fixed place to stay means that it's permanent and not subject to change. So even if a student is doubled up, you know, living with grandma and they might have been living there for a year or 2, because, you know, if their family is not on that lease, then that situation could change at any time, meaning that, you know, if the landlord decides there's too many people in the apartment, they have to leave, it's not a stable, fixed scenario. And regular also is important if it is on a consistent basis. So even if, you know, they're staying in a trailer, they might have to move that trailer every night based on, you know, where is accessible for them to stay. So to keep these questions in mind when you're deciding eligibility is really important that it's done in a fair way. And again, that adequacy piece as well. Is there running water? Is there, you know, all of the physical and psychological needs being met in the home environment as far as like have a place to do homework, have a place to shower, have lights that are on. And the question that you can fall back to ask yourself is can the student go to the same place every night to sleep in a safe and sufficient place? And so we'll talk about this a little bit more, but just as like a general overview, these are the 3 pieces of eligibility. And now we're going to go into the importance of the case-by-case basis approach. And let's see, yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. So we heard a lot about how it can be challenging to interpret, address, and apply practice due to that well-known gray area of McKinney-Vento. And so a great way to remind ourselves of how to do this work so that it's student-centered and equitable is to remember that decisions are always made on a case-by-case basis. That begins with listening carefully and curiously to the situations that folks are experiencing and really trusting their experience in their own lives of how that fits in. So we'll offer some examples of what case-by-case decision-making does mean and does not mean. And for this part, please feel free to chime in the chat, come off mute. We would love to hear from you. Okay, so we could spend a whole training on this slide alone, so I won't go into all of the different definitions on the screen, but feel free to read through those. But we know that we all come to this work because we care about students and families and what's best for them, and can agree that all humans are deserving of shelter and support. And because we've been socialized in a society that has lots of racial and economic stereotypes and, socialized through the media and other things, personal biases can come into play about decisions about who deserves services. So it's important to check our own biases of when we're deciding who is deserving or undeserving of services. Because even though it doesn't feel like it on the ground, sometimes we do have power in our roles of deciding eligibility and to be a gatekeeper of resources, even though that, unfortunately, the resources are not as much as we would like, but we do have that power of how open we keep that gate, if that makes sense. So to just remember to check how you're coming to decision-making. Sometimes because of the warranted lack of trust that a lot of families have with the school system based on historical oppression and trauma, they might not feel as forthright with their information, or that they're not as trusting for a good reason. So to really take the time to build trust with families and to fully understand their situation is a great way to be able to use this case-by-case approach. It's not our role to investigate whether a family is homeless or not. In fact, it's against federal and state laws to do so. If a family is, coming towards for support and those 3 areas of eligibility are met, meaning that they don't have that fixed, regular, or adequate space to sleep at night, then they would be eligible for services. I remember a situation at the shelter I worked at, the domestic violence shelter, of a woman having acrylic nails, and many of my coworkers were making comments about, oh, she can't be home. She must not really, need this service because she has acrylic nails, and those are, those cost money. But to really understand that it's not our role to judge how folks are spending their money, or, deciding because they have a nice thing, that doesn't mean that they aren't homeless at the same time, right? To really unpack some of those biases, so that we come to this work in a way that we can treat all folks that come to us the same, and really just fall back on the eligibility requirements versus our own personal biases of the situation. And also, I'd just like to add, because of burnout and the scarcity mindset and the realities of the scarcity of resources in our communities, it can be easy to fall into this thinking of oh, well, they're just trying to use the system, or feeling like we really have to interrogate who is actually homeless because of, just the lack of resources and our own lack of bandwidth. And again, it's really important to make those decisions based on the facts that you're seeing and that you're hearing from families of their own lives, rather than our own biases coming in. So we're going to go into some of those best practices on the next slide here.
Before we get in, I just want to, drive home what Kayla's been sharing, and kind of the importance of choice, right? Coming into, if a family or student is coming to you with, a housing issue, they need support. Oftentimes when people are in, you know, the housing system, homeless world, a lot of choices are taken away from them, and it can be very, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, it's really hard when your choice is taken away for any of us, and we want to just be sure that through the relationships that you're, you know, the trust that you're building with folks, you're also helping them make these choices and not just coming in and making choices for people, because a lot of times that's what happens when families are in the system of support.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joey. So some of those do's of best practices for intakes is to build trust first, to only ask what you need to know to avoid re-traumatization. And this can be hard. I'm a really curious person. I remember when I was working in McKinney-Vento, sometimes I would just want to, you know, learn more about the situation or ask questions. And I had to stop myself to really, you know, ask myself, okay, do I need to know this for, you know, the services that I'm attempting to provide or to connect this family to, or is this more of just a curiosity, you know, personally? So it can be really re-traumatizing for survivors of violence and for folks experiencing homelessness and complex trauma to constantly have to retell their stories every time that they're trying to access services. So to just keep that in mind when you're asking those questions. And I also love to start by just giving an overview of McKinney-Vento services and what it is in my conversations with families so they can understand my role, where I'm coming from, you know, what services are available to them before just asking immediately, are you homeless? You know, like, and even taking that word homeless out in conversations with families can be helpful of, you know, I work with families that are living in transition or are in between places, something that can take away the stigma and that perceived judgment that can come up because a lot of families, you know, it can take a lot to ask for services because of the shame and stigma involved with experiencing homelessness. So to just keep that in mind in your conversations. And again, believing survivors of trauma without judgment and asking those open-ended questions so that based on, you know, the survivor's comfort level or the level of trust that they have with you, they can decide for themselves how much they want to share or not. And as far as the don'ts, like I mentioned, it's actually against federal and state law to ask to see proof of residence or a lease. And Googling addresses to assess validity of homeless status is really not something that we should be doing. We are not investigators. That's not part of our role. And even if we do Google an address and we see, you know, a home or an apartment building, that doesn't mean that they're stably housed. They could be doubled up. They could still be living in transition. So, you know, that's not best practice. Making eligibility decisions based on assumptions or personal biases is also, you know, like we've said, is something that to avoid. And to ask others about families' housing situations or over-investigating in that way can be really detrimental. Not only is it breaching confidentiality, right, but it is also just breaking that trust even further with the family, which can really, you know, limit folks from being willing to access services and further erode that trust with school systems. And I'm curious if, Joey, do you have anything to add on this one?
I just dropped the link to the OSPI sample intake form. I'm sure a lot of you have your own intake forms. Maybe you're already using this one, but just really thinking about how that intake process is a great way to kind of get information up front and then start building that relationship. And hopefully on your intake form, you can, you know, ask the questions that you need to know and not the ones that you don't. And use that as kind of a guide.
Thanks. And I'd love to open it up to the group if there's any reflections about this piece or any questions that you have. Love to hear from you. Okay. It's like there's no questions right now. We will have time later for Q&A, but I'll pass it over to you, Joey.
All right. Okay, so we are going to be talking a little bit about RVs and mobile homes. This is going to be a very interactive section. So first to start off, in the chat, could you share with us an estimate of what percentage of McKinney-Vento households qualify in your community due to living in an RV or mobile home park? I don't have the answer to this question, right? We have folks statewide. So if you, oh, it looks like we have a chat question in the chat, Kayla. So maybe I'm going to pause on this. If a family is doubled up, you can't ask for proof of address of the person where they are doubled up. So the clarification there is like, you can't ask for the proof of address being like, you can't ask for somebody to lease. Kayla, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Just if they provide an address, that's enough. You don't need to, ask for any like utility bills or leases or things that prove that, the person that they're living with name is on it or anything. We don't need to get to that level. They just have to, put the address of the person that they're staying with and, share that they're doubled up, and that would be enough to qualify them.
Yeah. Okay, back to the, let's hear, like, do folks have an estimate of thinking about your community and your McKinney-Vento numbers? Do you know if there are, could you give an estimate of how many families may qualify for McKinney-Vento because of the situation that they're living in an RV or mobile home park? About 15% in Squim. 4 to 5 in Sandwood, Camano. And I recognize this is kind of a hard question, right? Because then this gets into that kind of that piece of, not all RVs and mobile homes will qualify the family as McKinney-Vento. And sometimes it does. So really trying to think about it. We've got other folks who maybe just want a year. So this is very different community to community. And we've heard reflections from folks across the state that some communities, this is the majority of their McKinney-Vento population, right? You've got families who are doubled up and families who are living in inadequate mobile homes or trailers, right? So looks like we've got a couple of other thoughts coming in. Yeah, yep. So Chris, sharing that doubled up is by far the most students in the district, and that's, yeah, it's very common. All right, I'm gonna move forward. Thank you. Continue to pop things in there. And again, feel free to pop questions in the chat, raise your hand. We would love to continue to dialogue. So, Kayla had really driven home that the fixed, regular, and adequate. So when we're thinking about eligibility, we're asking that question: is it fixed? Is it regular? Is it adequate? So then trying to unpack a little bit more of what is adequate, because a lot of times that's where this comes in when we're thinking about, really any living situation, but people can get a little caught up in the mobile home or RV eligibility world, right? So we really want to think about, is it fixed, regular, and adequate? And then diving deeper into adequate being, if it's not adequate, that means it's substandard. And substandard, as defined by the Department of Education, is housing that lacks one of the fundamental utilities, such as water, electricity, or heat, is infested with vermin or mold, lacks a basic functional part, such as a working kitchen or a working toilet, or may present unreasonable dangers to adults, children, or persons with disabilities. Right? So it might be fixed, it might be regular, but maybe it's not adequate. Maybe there isn't running water. Maybe the kitchen isn't working. Maybe there isn't a toilet, right? Or there isn't a toilet accessible nearby, right? Maybe there's a lot of mold in the space, and that can be a really common one over here, is places that have mold, and that's very much a health concern. So Kayla dropped the link to the Department of Education's guidance around this as well. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this screen and start sharing a different screen. So bear with me as I make this transition real quick. All right, so we are going to do a quick Mentimeter sequencing here. So Kayla, can you see that all right? Did it come up? All right, so Kayla just dropped a link in the chat for the Mentimeter. So we are going to kind of go through a series of questions here. So this first one, you can click that link in the Mentimeter, use that code up above. So a student is living in their aunt's 2-bedroom mobile home with their mom, aunt, 3 siblings, and 2 cousins. Is this student McKinney-Vento eligible? So using that link, you can go ahead and voting should be open. All right, now it's not showing me any responses. So either my links aren't working, Mentimeter's not working, or nobody's answering. I see one in the chat. You got a text box. Ooh.
Oh, Joey?
That's a different question, huh?
Yeah, I was gonna say the question we have is share a golden nugget.
Okay, that's. Let me see if maybe it's. No. Oh, I think that may be the wrong link. Let's try this one. Yeah, technology. No, that's the
same thing. One. Yeah.
Well, all right.
Maybe we can just put the answers in the chat instead
of.
Yeah,
let's do that. Oh, how frustrating.
If people want to share, you know, if this scenario is close to home, are they identified or work with the families? If people want to come off mic.
All right, so I'm seeing a lot of yeses in the chat. I see need more info. Yep, they're doubled up. Yes, all right. Hold on, I'm resetting my screen here. I'm sorry. That's a lot of people in the trailer. Yep. So I think our answer to this question is yes, this family does qualify as McKinney-Vento. It is doubled up. It is capacity that space is not adequate for that many people, right? And so that's where it comes into that adequacy piece. We don't know who, you know, there's also the piece that this is the aunt's place, right? So that's going to be not their permanent space. So it may not be sustainable, or it may not be fixed. Right? All right, let me share my screen again. All right, next question, and we're just popping them in the chat because Mentimeter has given up on me for today. All right, so you have a family that's living in an RV, parking in a different place most nights. They can often be found in the Walmart parking lot. Is this family McKinney-Vento eligible? Getting a lot of quick yeses here. A lot of quick yeses. It isn't fixed or reliable. Yep, you got it, Stephanie. So yes, the answer is this family would be McKinney-Vento eligible. They may have a space to sleep. That RV may be, you know, maybe it's a really well set up RV, but it's moving around every night. That is not fixed or regular. All right. I do want to, this one can be interesting, and I don't necessarily have the answer, and I would love to hear people's thoughts on this. You know, we do also, like, we're currently in this world of some families are like, wow, we're going to do van life, right? And that, you know, by McKinney-Vento definition, they're sleeping somewhere else every night. Maybe it's not fixed and regular. I'm curious, and I don't necessarily have an answer to this. What would you do in that situation? Would you consider a family who's actively choosing to do van life McKinney-Vento? I'm seeing Marin putting in the chat, economic hardship or job loss is a McKinney-Vento qualifier, not personal preference. Yeah, I think that's where I'd fall back as well. Yeah. Thanks for rolling with that. All right. Another question. The family is living in an RV, renting a mobile home spot. So, you know, they have a lease for the space, it's permanent. But their RV doesn't have heat or electricity. Are they McKinney-Vento eligible? Yep. Yeah. All right, y'all are good at this. Clearly, you know how to do your jobs. This is great. Yeah, it's yes, because there's no adequate, it's not adequate. It's missing one of those basic utilities, right? No heat or electricity. All right, adding a spin to this. So they don't have heat or electricity right now. You help them get that fixed. Are they still McKinney-Vento eligible? Yes. For the year. Yep. All right. Shannon and Stephanie, you got it. So they are going to still be considered McKinney-Vento eligible because they're eligible for the whole year. So they may have heat, they may have regular housing, fixed housing now, heat and electricity, but they're still eligible because McKinney-Vento goes for the whole year. All right, we have a comment in the chat here about having a kid say that their parent didn't want to pay rent. So they told him it's sort of choice to live and freedom, but then talking to the parents, he found out that dad was in need of many things. So I think that's a really great point to look at the kind of the things that parents, like the way they'll present their situation to their kids and maybe what is actually going on for the family. So that's where that importance of building that trust and rapport with not only the student, but also the parents comes in. Thank you for that example. All right, last one. A family moved into a mobile home in a nearby mobile home neighborhood. They're excited to have a space to call home. Is this family McKinney-Vento eligible? Yes, no, need more info. Yeah. All right, I'm seeing a lot of need more info, and I would agree. I think on the surface, if you were just to read that sentence, it's like, well, no, they have a space, so no, not technically, like just based on that sentence, but realistically, needing to be sure that it is an adequate space. Maybe they already are McKinney-Vento eligible because where have they been living before they moved in, right? So, all right, you guys passed the test. Good work. Passing it on to Kayla. Thanks for bearing with my Mentimeter issues.
Thanks, Joey. I just wanted to pause real quick for questions, and I had seen one in the chat from Stephanie. Stephanie, do you want to share a bit more about that? The question was, are there capacity laws? Do you mean like within a home or?
So I'm from California, and I know that when my in-laws lived in a mobile home park, they were allowed to have 2 people per bedroom and 1 extra. So they had a 2-bedroom and they could only have 5 people there. That was my question, was like, is that the same thing here in Washington?
Oh, you're talking about capacity laws, like specifically for the RV
right
park?
Well, just like, well, any place. I mean, it's, in California, it's apartments, it's RVs, it's where I lived, everything had a capacity law. So like, you know, my mom couldn't rent an apartment with 3 of us unless it was enough space. Does that make sense? So I was just wondering if they have capacity laws here. I'm not up to date on everything that's here.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I know that like Section 8 apartments do have capacity laws, as well as like some shelters and transitional housing programs. I would say that at RV parks and, you know, mobile home parks depend like situation by situation or park by park what their laws would be. But for this context of if a family, you know, is on the lease or the rental agreement with the mobile home park, like just they would still be doubled up if they weren't on the lease of who they were staying with, if that makes sense, regardless of what the capacity laws are there.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that they were McKinney-Vento, but that was just my question, because, you know, like when you say regular, it's not regular because they can get kicked out at any point if they're over capacity as well. It was just another reason that I was thinking.
Yeah. Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. I was going to chime in. Yes, the state does have occupancy laws for housing, and then counties have their own for housing providers. And then also, like Kayla said, If you have a voucher of some sort, whether it's public or private, there is additional, right? You only get a voucher for the amount of family members that are legally listed under your household. But the example we're giving is the doubled up living is due to the financial hardship. And so oftentimes, especially if you're a family member, right? Like if, God forbid, something happened to my sister and her children, she'd live with us. And if we were renters in a public or private market and we're in 2-bedroom, like you said, we would be over the occupancy limit. However, due to that hardship, we oftentimes don't want our families to be literally sleeping or there's not shelter bed. So it's an interim situation. Might also, for unaccompanied youth, it's a couch surfing situation. So that's why there's these additional services that provide them those resources in those moments. So those hardships can have services until those needs could be met, until we can do a housing first or a diversion model or some sort of type of support to get the family like legally housed. But we know that these are short-term, interim opportunities.
Thanks. I was just trying to think. I like to have, like, if you can have multiple reasons, I like to have them. You know what I mean? Like if you can list them and you can be like, well, it's X, X, and X. Then if anyone questions it, you can be like, this is why. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. That's a good point. Are there any other questions or reflections thus far?
I do want to highlight, Marilee, right before I asked everyone to put things in the chat, shared that there was an RV park in their community that was condemned by local county code enforcement divisions last year, and people are still there. So they're qualifying everyone as McKinney-Vento eligible in that location because it was condemned. So I think that's another great example of kind of, being in the know of what's happening in your local communities. I think that's an important piece as well, this process that I know you all know, but thank you for that example, Marilee.
Thanks, Joey. So we're going to shift into talking about community connections and how we can build community and partnerships. So in the chat, please name one of the organizations that's been super helpful in helping meet the needs of students and families in your community. And knowing that this is statewide training, right? Some of these might look different community to community, but we would love to just hear from what things are working for you and your students and families you're serving.
We've got some community and family centers, youth emergency services, neighborhood house, more family resource centers, yep, family support centers. Kelly, do you think you could define what SIPSI is for everyone?
If Kelly can't come.
Oh, mic doesn't work. Well, if you know what the acronym stands for, you want to pop it in the chat. Thank you. I am familiar, but always forget what the acronym actually stands for. Looks like Marilee's got a lot. We've got the Rotary Club of Sumner. Rotary clubs can be a huge, valuable resource. The Reach Center, Building Changes. Hey, that's us. Family Center, food banks, yep. Kelly, okay, I'm glad it's not just me forgetting the acronym for SIPSI. Family and Student Engagement Center, Community Agencies for Food and Clothing. Student Family Stability Initiative. Thanks, Julie.
So that one is a partnership between specific districts and a local nonprofit that help house families.
Mm-hmm. A lot of great examples of strong partnerships. I think others that we hear that I haven't seen yet are also like religious communities often have like can have a very helpful community support programs, whether that's food banks or clothing. Yeah, so just. All right, Kayla, you ready?
Yeah, thanks all. So the importance of building community with your local community partners is great, not just for the students and families that you're serving, right? To have like another trusted person that they can go to for specific services, but also for us, it's really helpful to have like a network of support so that we know personally, right? Like we can do a warm handoff with a family and say, hey, you know, like Joey over at Building Changes can help with X, Y, and Z, and be able to give that handoff rather than just provide a phone number that probably doesn't work, or like an email link, you know, to be able to really know what's in our community and build relationships with those folks, not only when there's a crisis and like when you need something from them, but just to be in community and have that like mutual peer support for ourselves as well. And we know some of the best practices to do that is to have semi-regular provider meetings. At one of the high schools I worked with, they would have quarterly meetings. The social worker would pull together, and they would just have, you know, anyone that might like provide services for their students. So like community mental health agencies, food banks, folks that would help with case management. So they would have, you know, everyone there sharing about what they offer and figuring out ways that they could partner and build that safety net for students. And again, it also strengthens the students' ties to community and support. So we know that the #1 protective factor for students experiencing trauma and homelessness is to have a stable adult in their life that they trust, they feel like really sees them for who they are. And so being able to open up the opportunities for, you know, maybe we're not always that person, but maybe we can connect the student or young person to an adult, a trusting adult that they can, you know, provide or get support from. And it's also great to provide training opportunities about the realities of homelessness for school staff and help debunk some of those myths that are out there about homelessness, and just, you know, overall educate about the program, because McKinney-Vento is so underfunded. A lot of folks don't know that it exists. So it's really helpful for all school staff, like from, you know, janitor, bus driver, all the way to admin and everyone in between, to learn about what the program can offer. We've had heard from some school districts, they're filming trainings because we know like time is really hard. It's really hard to get on. I used to like beg admin to come to their staff meeting and to share for 5 or 10 minutes about what the program was and how to support students experiencing homelessness. And this idea that this one school district has is great of having just like pre-made videos that educators can watch on their own time, or perhaps like they would have time during a staff meeting to view those collectively, can be a great way, and also you know, help with your bandwidth as well. So the next part we're going to go into is working with unaccompanied youth.
Before we go into it though, I just want to highlight some of the links I dropped in the chat. Yay! So we popped in the McKinney-Vento flyers that Building Changes created in partnership with Longview School District, Longville-Kelso area. And so these are some flyers that you can print and hang in your school and community areas. These are really important for families to be able to see what, you know, what resources may be available to them. Maybe it'll help a student or family recognize like, hey, didn't realize we qualified for that. And that can also be helpful for other people in the community to kind of have an idea of what's going on. I'm also very partial. I think they're really pretty flyers. Like I think the visuals and illustrations are really helpful, because I think oftentimes the McKinney-Vento flyers that we get like from, you know, the state, from the federal like Department of Ed, like they're kind of text heavy and a little hard to look at, let's be honest. So nice to have a more grabbing version. It is available in English with editable text, as well as, I think we currently have it available in Spanish, but there is a version that you can get translated into different languages. If this is something that you're really excited about and you have a lot of different languages that you would like it translated into, also come talk to us, because we may be able to help support make that happen. And then I put in, you know, plugs for our upcoming trainings, two of them specifically looking at that collaborative partnerships. So navigating the housing system, as well as school housing community partnerships. Great trainings to have you come to, as well as to invite other staff to join, or community partners. Yeah. And I will pass it back to Kayla and go to the next slide. Yeah.
Thanks, Joey. So just a quick overview of, or you can go to the next one, of who's considered an unaccompanied youth. So this is any student who's not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So they might be residing with like an auntie or a cousin, or couch surfing with friends. And typically we think of unaccompanied youth as older, like high school students. We know a very large percentage of unaccompanied youth have had to flee home because of family violence or not being accepted for their sexual orientation or, some other family dynamic. And they might also be living on their own, but there is no age limit to who is considered an unaccompanied youth. There is that gray area between like if a student is living with a family member, but there's no court, involvement, meaning that they're not technically in foster care. It's really about like the legal custody. So if they're just temporarily staying with an auntie until, their parent gets out of rehab or whatever is happening, then they would be considered unaccompanied. Sometimes we've gotten a question about like questioning if a student is eligible based on the assumption that they have the ability to return to their home of origin. And we just want to stress that unaccompanied youth are eligible for services regardless of the reasons that led to the separation from their family. And it's not on us to, make judgments about their choice in that or their call. There is a lot of information that we're likely missing about why they feel like home is not a safe place for them. And just like everyone else under the umbrella of McKinney-Vento, they have the right to immediate enrollment without proof of guardianship or immunizations or birth certificates. And unaccompanied youth is up to age 21. Yeah, and like, and there are some new laws that are supporting unaccompanied youth that also can cover up to age 21, even if they have graduated from the school district. This is pretty new law, so I know I went through this process with a student and both. So I'll explain the law first. So it's that unaccompanied youth can obtain state ID cards without identifying documents. Like when you go to the DMV and you need like 8,000 documents to get your ID or license. This new law is saying that if a student was or is McKinney-Vento eligible, then they can get their ID or license with the support of the McKinney-Vento liaison. There's just some paperwork to fill out. But because the law is so new, both the Department of Licensing and the McKinney-Vento liaison didn't know what I was talking about when I went. So you might need to, push a little bit. I see your question in the chat, Anna Maria, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of research on that one. But I would say, I think this came up in the OSPI training as far as like, it's going back to that fixed, regular, and adequate piece again. So some folks might think like, oh, an exchange student, like an international exchange student might be unaccompanied, meaning that they're not, currently in the physical custody of their guardian. But there is this agreement in place where they are, have a fixed, regular, and adequate place to stay in their host family's home. So yeah, the distinction of eligibility always is the same regardless of if it's for a student or for a student that is unaccompanied. It's really just going back to that fixed, regular, adequate. And some of the other new laws for supporting unaccompanied youth is that came up during COVID, is that they can obtain vaccines and now opened up to like medical and dental and vision services with the support of the McKinney-Vento liaison. And they can actually now consent to their own primary health care if they're unable to obtain consent from a McKinney-Vento liaison. Any other questions on that piece?
We do have a link to more about the mature minor doctrine and the healthcare consent. I just don't have the link readily accessible, so I will try and share that during the break.
Thanks, Joey. There's also some other exciting resources that will be dropped in the chat about FAFSA can be really confusing, even for housed folks. And so there is, sorry, I'm just reading the chat here. Yeah, the services for unaccompanied youth can go up to age 21, meaning that I don't believe, I'll have to do a bit more research on this, and Marat, you might know more, but I don't believe that folks over 21 can attend K through 12 school anyway. So that if they're coming across your desk, then they would be Yeah, oh, yes, they can, Kelly says. Okay, I'll do a bit more research on the break and come back to that one.
I'll just add, there is no early limit. Unaccompanied youth could even be kindergarten, elementary school, all the way up to 21, and they can turn 21 in that school year, right? So when they turn 21 doesn't mean that they would be withdrawn out of the school year. They would still be honored as a student until that school year ends.
Okay, thanks, Marat. And again, if folks in the room, I know there's a lot of wisdom in the room, so feel free to chime into the chat as well, but I'll do a bit more research on the break on that one. But as far as FAFSA goes, there's some new laws that passed as well that made it easier for unaccompanied youth to access FAFSA. And so there's going to be, yeah, that whole chunk of links in the chat for more information about that. And yes, you will get copies of the slides. And I think that we're going to go into a break, but Anne-Marie, if you want to stay for a second, then I could just give a quick recap, or we could go back to that slide.
Before we send anyone off, I just really want to highlight some of the links that I just dropped in the chat. And I know I'm dropping a bunch of links. The goal is drop them, you can look at them now, and then they'll be attached in the slides later, so you can go back to them. But specifically the Schoolhouse Connection links in there. These are, I've more recently found them, and I think they are really cool, really awesome, and also very helpful to kind of walk through the different steps of the process on their FAFSA page. It lets you decide, like, are you a school provider supporting a student? Are you the student? Are you a parent? Like, it helps you click based on who you are in the situation and helps walk through that process. And it is FAFSA season, so yeah. And I think we've got about 2 minutes before we want to move forward. I do want to hear, so, you know, I want to hear what resources have been helpful to some of you in the room. What have been helpful and available to supporting unaccompanied homeless youth in your community? So if anyone has any examples of resources or things that have been helpful to you, or have any wishes of things, please just unmute or drop in the chat. Much needed from Kelly. Got that. Youth emergency services, local churches, community members stepping up, a wish for a youth shelter over in Squim, wish for case management for housing, better housing and shelter laws. Yeah. Sounds like YMCA has a program. The YMCA, I forget if it's just the greater Seattle area or wider, there is a host homes program that the YMCA is doing, and that is a really cool, yeah, YMCA is amazing. So the YMCA host homes program is really awesome and a great way to get unaccompanied students into a supportive household, at least for a time. That's a great question. So we have a question in the chat about, can unaccompanied youth give permissions for themselves to play sports if they don't have a parent to sign?
So they wouldn't need a permission from a parent. I believe that would fall under McKinney-Vento liaison can sign off for like the physical needed for sports. Marat, do you want to add more on that?
Yeah, that is true. That is where the McKinney-Vento and their advocate, the student's advocate, and if there's a legal advocate involved, come and support any type of permission for sports. And I know that there are some folks, I was just scrolling the participants, anyone who's experienced working with unaccompanied youth and supporting them through permissions and access to resources without parental presence. Has anyone had that experience, and how did you? Kelly, do you mind sharing an example of how you were able to guide through that? Oh, no, Mike. Okay. Anyone else? We want this to be interactive, so we'd love to hear what's happening across the state.
Well, I'll chime in here. As a longtime old athletic director, I had the situation come up a couple of times where we had McKinney-Vento students, and the question came up about eligibility, and those did not go to committee. They were granted eligibility in District 4. So I think most of those cases, they're going to be granted eligibility and there will be no questions asked.
I will add something to that. I'm an OMAC, and we had an issue earlier this year with a McKinney-Vento transfer youth, and it did go to committee and he was denied eligibility. And I was able to work with OSPI and get additional support because his rights were being violated in this regard, and they were great, and he's now eligible, and it wasn't anything more than just bringing the right people to the table. But we have a new AD and I'm pretty new to this position. And so it was really helpful to have that resource from OSPI to support us.
Good.
Thank you so much for those examples. And I hope that that answers the questions that we're seeing in the chat. So we are going to move into a short break. We're going to return at 11:07. When we return, we'll be talking building points of contact, and we'll be hearing from the one and only Kyle Moore. So I will see you all at 11:07. And we will be here if folks have more questions kind of during this break time. May go off camera if nobody does though.
I have a question.
Kayla, I have a question. So here's a scenario. A student's parent is living with a single parent and they have stable housing, and that parent goes into long-term inpatient treatment, and the student is living alone in a stable house, apartment, and the student is alone. So are my instinct is that they would be unaccompanied, but we got pushback in our area for this one.
Mm-hmm. I would agree that they would be unaccompanied as well, but I'm curious like how they're paying rent, or is there some economic hardship part to that?
I don't know. I had, there wasn't a desire to answer. I was trying to tread carefully of not asking too much, but offering support if needed. And they did not indicate that they needed support with, additional resources. And so I wasn't able to get a lot of information.
Yeah, my instinct would be that they would, qualify based on the, being there alone. But Marette, I'm curious if you have some other thoughts. Which might have gone to break.
Okay, do they qualify as unaccompanied youth, or are you trying to qualify them as unaccompanied homeless youth?
I was trying to qualify them for McKinney-Vento as an unaccompanied youth. And I thought that they might, my understanding is that a student automatically qualifies if they are an unaccompanied youth. So I guess I'm looking for clarification on that.
That's not the message that NAEHYC gives out at their national conference. Only because they're unaccompanied youth does not automatically make them homeless.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna share. I was conflicted because I wanted to make sure that's not what I was hearing. Just because they're unaccompanied does not make the circumstances that they're in through, I know you said it was hard probing. If there's housing instability, will qualify them for the McKinney-Vento.
So being an unaccompanied youth, I guess that's where I'm wanting more, and I got pulled away. So I missed your slide on unaccompanied youth and how that relates to qualifying for McKinney-Vento. So that's because I have a lot of students who are living independently, and I just need some more clarity around which one of them qualify for McKinney-Vento services.
When you say living independently, you're not saying like emancipated or have gone through the process of any legal separation.
Correct.
And how do you know that they're living independently based off case management questions?
I have some students who have moved out and they have jobs and they're paying their own rent, but they're only 16 years old. I have other students who are living with another family just independently. They're not living with their own guardians anymore. They're couch surfing. And yeah, so, and then I had this student who was living alone in his house with no guardian for more than a month. And so yeah, I have a lot of random situations like this where I want to know which of these students are McKinney-Vento eligible.
So it sounds very, and I would want others to chime in because it's a very tailored, individualized identification. Each case, each person that you mentioned, I would have a follow-up question and I wouldn't just automatically qualify them. When I hear you say the guardian wasn't there, there's a lot of things like, is it an understanding? Is it a business trip? Is it negligent?
Oh, that was inpatient treatment. That was long-term inpatient treatment that the parent left. And
okay, that would be unaccompanied. Given that, yeah, I would consider them McKinney-Vento eligible. Yeah, you would kind of have to filter through each case like that. The hardest one that I used to have really difficulties with are the domestic issues amongst the student and the parents, and when they're labeled runaway. That can be really difficult when the biological family parents are involved actively and you're caught in the middle of a runaway situation. That could also be couch surfing. You definitely want to be an advocate and a safe place for the student, but it's also really difficult because the biological parent have all the legal rights to their educational access. So verifying or deeming them eligible might be difficult in situations like that. If the family and the parents are very visible and active and it happens to be a domestic dispute or just a moment of not getting along, so I'm gonna go stay with a relative, cool down and come back. You know, there are those situations that occur. And so those are the really hard ones to navigate. And I've gone in those situations where we've also had biological parents go to the superintendent and be mortified that we deemed their child as unaccompanied homeless youth when that wasn't the reality of their life. And so those are very complex issues that you may want to bring in the school counselors and others or use an MTSS process perhaps to verify if this is an unaccompanied homeless situation.
I don't want to stop this conversation because I think it's extremely important and very helpful. And we want to keep rolling. We will have times for some more like case conferencing and breakout rooms to kind of like ask peers. And then we'll come back and have a little time for discussion too. But all right, calling everyone back. Come on back, break's over. If you're back, please turn on your camera, give me a thumbs up, like something, so I know folks are here and we can get rolling. Sweet. Oh yeah, look at all these smiley faces. I love it. Great. I love seeing faces. It's really hard as presenters when everyone has their cameras off. It feels like you're in a room by yourself, just like kind of talking to the wall. So it's really good to see your faces. All right, so we're moving on to the McKinney-Vento building points of contact section. So kind of grounding us in this, I want you to think, maybe you are a building point of contact yourself, so you can think of yourself too. But I want to think about a building point of contact that you deeply appreciate, someone you work with. And in the chat, share a trait or what it is that they do that you would love to see all building points of contact do. This can be a trait like they're super communicative, very detailed. Ooh, okay. And also, we're popping in the chat, and if a couple people just want to unmute and shout it out too, I welcome that. Detailed, compassionate, communication. Communication is a must.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to.
I know that there's more things we appreciate about our building points of contact: quick responses, connections with the students and families. Yeah, just a reminder to mute if you're not speaking, unless you wanted to add something, then please do. All right, so while we're still thinking about this, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout this next section, but just want to be sure that we are, yeah, confidentiality, thinking about the different pieces that our relationship with our building points of contact hold, and what we find to be helpful and valuable. All right, so just a quick open communication mindfulness. All right, so we are going to give just kind of what does the law say a building point of contact is. As far as we're aware, Washington State is the only state that has a requirement in law for there to be a building point of contact in every school. This is super important. I think it's pretty incredible that our state has codified this, and I think every other state should. But so just a reminder, so there will be a building point of contact in every school, and the OSPI should make OSPI will make best practices for choosing and training building points of contact available to each district. So the building point of contact is typically appointed by the principal, and they're focused on the identification and serve as the connection to the district McKinney-Vento liaison for students and families. As we know, the building point of contact, that's probably not their only job, right? Which we'll hear a little bit about later. Often building points of contacts are the school social worker, maybe they're the school administrator, like one of the school administrators, maybe it's someone on the free who's tracking the free and reduced lunch, right? So lots of different people it could be. I'm seeing some more in the chat here, cultural awareness. All right, and then moving forward here. All right, so what is the role of a building point of contact? So like I said, Washington is the only state where this is required by law. Shout out to us for being awesome. Their role is to identify and support students experiencing homelessness and in care. They are providing that building level support to students and families, and helping the school level staff understand the students' needs and rights, and informing them about homelessness and McKinney-Vento services. And then that coordination piece, right, that we've seen in the chat, talking about that detailed communication, open responsiveness, right? So that is, yeah, the main piece. I really do want to recognize that oftentimes this role is tacked onto an existing role, doesn't always offer any additional pay or support. So just recognizing that it is another ask, but it's important to make sure that you are having that open relationship with your building point of contact so you can support each other and in turn support the students. OSPI does do a building point of contact training every year. And I have links to this last year's slides. I don't know when their training will be this year, but keep your eye on OSPI's website. All right, so now we're going to go into an exciting part here where we have the one and only Kyle Moore, MSW, from Tacoma Public Schools, working in Baker Middle School as a school social worker and a building point of contact. Join us. We are excited to have Kyle with us today, and I will let him introduce himself, and then we have some questions. Feel free to pop any other questions that you have in the chat, and we can also unmute later. So we've got about 10-15 minutes with Kyle, and then a little time for questions.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Kyle Moore, social worker, school social worker at Baker Middle School in Tacoma Schools. Pronouns are he, him. I promise I'm not in a jail right now, even though it looks like it with the window up there. I'm at my school right now. And if I sound a little gravelly, my son and I are getting over a nasty bug. So, but I'm here at work, ready to roll. I'm happy to be on here with you guys.
Thank you, Kyle.
And Marie, hello. Kelly, yes. Old peeps from Highland. See you guys.
Love it. All right, Kyle, we're going to start off with the first question here. How does having a McKinney-Vento building point of contact benefit students, your school building and your district? So yeah, working our way out.
Yeah, well, with students, it gives them, you know, a face, an actual human being they can go talk to get support from, to you know, advocate for them or make sure their voice is being heard, and to make sure they're seen, make sure they're, you know, that their situation is known, and that any barriers they're, you know, they're seeing, that they're experiencing are being addressed by the building or the district, both. And so that's the biggest thing, just having a relationship with somebody, making a connection with somebody, you know, ideally, that can not just like identify them as qualifying for McKinney-Vento, but it can provide ongoing support for them. And then at the building level, is that the other part of it? And the district level? The building, it gives, I think it takes a lot of pressure off of other building staff, because it's somebody who can, you know, do that work for identifying, but also collaborating and making sure that supports are set up. You have somebody who is working with different school staff, with admin, with teachers, with school counselors, with family liaisons. You know, sometimes it is a family liaison or a counselor or a social worker who's the point of contact. But it's someone who can kind of coordinate services and keep things working smoothly, ideally, for those students, and a place to go if anybody in the building has questions or concerns come up about a student, or, you know, they notice things. You have somebody specific to go to for those concerns. And at the district level, I mean, that the huge thing is identifying there, like making sure that you really know what the real picture is, as far as how many students are experiencing homelessness, some sort of housing instability in your district. And then somebody who can collaborate with the district level liaison, that's huge. Having that communication and that ongoing collaboration. So, I mean, there are so many students in these situations and families that are dealing with this, that you need people in the building working with the district staff to support those students.
Thank you. All right. So how do you balance the responsibilities of your role as a social worker and as a building point of contact?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it is a natural fit. I feel like if there is a social worker in a building, I'm lucky to be in one building. A lot of social workers are spread across a couple buildings or a few buildings or multiple buildings. So it is a good fit, I feel like, for a social worker to have that role. There's a lot of extra paperwork that goes along with the role. As a lot of you know, doing the intakes and filling out the forms, filling out the item requests and different referrals and all those things. Some of that stuff is what you do normally as a social worker. Some of it is specific to the McKinney-Vento role, which takes extra time, extra paperwork. So trying to balance the actual direct service, working directly with the students, with that indirect kind of paperwork, referrals, doing the intakes. You know, that's a tough balance. I always try to lean more towards the direct service, working with the students. But if you don't get the paperwork done, then they're not getting the funds they need or the resources they need either. So you got to do both.
I'm sure that a lot of folks on this call can relate to that, trying to find that balance between paperwork and doing your direct service, working with students and families.
Right. And sometimes you're skipping meetings and things like that to make sure everything's done. And, you know, it's, yeah.
All right. What is one thing you wish was in place for McKinney-Vento students?
One thing I wish was in place for students, I mean, the biggest thing is just like more housing, obviously. I mean, that's just the overarching thing. More available housing, like more supply, more transitional housing, other than just emergency shelters, and you know, and more prevention, really, like prevention funds and options for people who are about to get evicted, people who are about to enter into homelessness, just that the prevention funds, but then also the availability of affordable housing. I mean, that's the biggest barrier right there.
And then the last question that we have today, but I want to make sure that we have time for anyone else to ask any questions. What is one thing you wish was in place for McKinney-Vento building points of contact?
I mean, one thing would be, it'd be nice to have a stipend. I mean, for the extra intake paperwork and things that you do at the building level, especially if you're not a social worker. Even if you are a social worker, like I said, it is extra work doing those intakes, takes up a lot of time. But a lot of times you have a lot of different roles that you're doing in a building. And if I think it would incentivize more targeted work if you have a stipend. I think it would incentivize, I think you might end up identifying more students as a district if a stipend is there. Little incentive.
Looks like we have some agreement about the stipend in the chat, as well as kind of a question about like, would a part-time clerk for paperwork help?
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, that'd be great too. I mean, yeah, and I mean, you get kind of those things for tech support, so why not for a role like that? You know.
All right, so now we've got a couple more minutes. We can open up the space. Does anyone have any other questions for Kyle that they can be built, like specifically building point of contact, a little more general, like learning about kind of his role in Tacoma, or, you know, we can also use this time if you have any questions that you think Kyle might be able to help answer, specific situations. I will open it up. Feel free to unmute or add to the chat. And Kyle, feel free to add anything that you feel like we missed in our questions.
Well, I can say I think that you know, I mentioned it briefly, but the communication and collaboration between the district liaison and the building level liaison is huge. I've been lucky in Tacoma to work with a lot of great liaisons, and when I was at Highline as well, who had that strong collaboration. We would go out on home visits together, brainstorm creative solutions to different situations that would come up, and showing face, like getting into the buildings. You know, whenever I have a district liaison coming into the building, meeting students, meeting staff, talking to me face to face, that really goes a long way, and really helps a lot. Janelle Harkin.
Hey, thanks. I'm a new district coordinator, so any advice is always welcome. Just as kind of a little, it's a lot to figure out, and then trying to support people in your role. I don't know how to make the work easier, because it's really just not going to be easy work. But yeah. Are there any tools that you found that work to do that kind of coordination? It feels a little bit like a three-legged race in the sense that we're all kind of working together, but doing different parts of the system. Any visuals or flow charts or things that help kind of make it? We have new family engagement liaisons that maybe are just beginning to access the process. And so to almost like I want to be able to do a GLAD pictorial and just have it kind of show them how the parts fit together. And I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. I mean, here at Baker, we have a new family liaison. I'm a social worker in a new role here, and we have 2 school counselors, and we have a school site. So we have a lot of support staff. And then we have our housing navigator at the district level and we have two McKinney-Vento liaisons at the district level. So there's a lot of different roles, and yeah, we sat down at the beginning, and I think a flow chart can be great and just establishing the roles, but that once you establish those things, that who's going to do what, then having that ongoing communication is just as important, in my opinion. You know, all this is just like my perspective as one person doing this job, but it seems to help. You kind of come up with a plan, who's going to do what, whether it's a flow chart or role descriptions, and then you keep in communication and you collaborate constantly. I think that's really important. Not working in silos is huge. So if you develop a flow chart, but then you don't actually stay in contact, you know, then it's not worth anything, in my opinion.
So just highlighting a few things in the chat here. So just kind of clarifying and understanding that building points of contact help identify it, but they don't do the intake or the actual qualifying of students as McKinney-Vento. Just.
What was that? Okay, I see that.
I think it's like a just clarifying and understanding, and I just want to see if that lands with you as well.
Yeah, so I can only speak for Tacoma, but in Tacoma, the building points of contact do the intakes. In general, they don't always do them. Sometimes the district level liaisons do the intakes if they get the information first. So let's say I identify a student, you know, through the housing questionnaire, or just through conversations or through things that staff bring up. Then I would fill out the intake. I would learn about the family situation. I would list any other family members, other students that might be students in the district, and I would send that to the district liaison. They would approve it, and they would notify staff at the other schools if there are other students in that family who are attending other schools in that district, so they can be identified as well. But we do those intakes. Yeah.
So I think to answer Margaret's follow-up question, that yes, it is district dependent on whether or not the building points of contact are doing the direct intakes or not.
I assume so.
Yeah. And then yeah, cross-training is important. Always going to agree with that one. All right. Any other questions, comments, kudos, anything? Oh, here we go. So an example from another school district for Margaret. So Stephanie over in Highline is a school counselor and in the building, and Stephanie does the paperwork that then gets sent to the district. So doing that intake level. So, and then looking at, is it possible to have a Google form in lieu of a student housing questionnaire or whatever it may be? Anyone have any examples related to that? Do you use the Google form in your district for your intake?
We do, yeah. We have a web-based, it's Microsoft Forms. I guess we've got a contract with Microsoft, but we have a web-based intake form. The questionnaire though is paper questionnaire, and they have a digital questionnaire that goes out as well. The district sends out, this year the district sent out all the questionnaires, which has been nice. But we're going to do another one halfway through the year, just a paper one, make sure everybody gets it.
So Janelle, I'm seeing maybe an opportunity for you to drop your email in the chat, and or have some other folks drop their emails to make sure that you can connect there.
Yeah, I can send that to you, Janelle, for sure. Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, just wanting to say thank you. Oh, we got a long chat in here from Mayor Lee. Gonna count on me for long answers. We always can, Mayor Lee. Always coming in with the good stuff. So I think I'm going to say thank you to Kyle as we kind of read Mayor Lee's question here. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you in the space. You're bringing in your perspective. Thanks to everyone for asking questions. Kyle, you're welcome to hang around, and I'll put you in a breakout room. And if you have to go, I also understand that as well.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Great seeing all of you.
Thanks, Kyle. All right, so Marilee definitely just kind of gave a really great example of kind of what this process looks like in Sumner Bonnie Lake, just to, you know, really drive home that it is different district to district. So, all right, so the next thing that we are going to do, second to last, is we're going to go into some breakout rooms. Kind of the flow for the rest of the presentation today is going to be breakout rooms, time to connect, strategize with each other. Then we're going to go into, we'll come back into the main room, and we'll make sure to have an opportunity to kind of keep digging a little deeper into maybe some of the themes that arose in your breakout rooms, or questions that arise. And seeing that some folks may not be able to stay past 11:30, thank you for joining us. But I would love for as many people to stay for the breakout rooms as possible, please. So we are going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 to 15 minutes. Kayla did just drop some more context for the unaccompanied youth questions and discussion we were having earlier. Again, it's kind of confusing. There's a lot of gray area, so thanks for bearing with us as we also are finding that together. So going to send you into breakout rooms. Ideas for that space, use it as you want, but some suggestions include putting your name and stuff in the chat, introducing yourselves to each other either before you share or whatever you want that to look like. Share best practices from your district. Dive deeper into any of the topics covered today or other topics related to the work that you would like to check in on. And then time to case conference, right? Maybe you have a situation that you're like, I'm really not sure what to do. We have a wealth of knowledge in this room, and hopefully you can maybe think through some of those things with some peers. So I'm going to break us in to probably about like 4 breakout rooms, I think. I am gonna just automatically do the breakout rooms today. I'm not set up to do choose your own at this time, but yeah, we're gonna do about nine participants per room. So we will return at 11:45. And those rooms are now open. So go ahead and join building changes, folks. I think you're all gone, but I might move you around so you're not in the same room. All right, I think that we have everyone. Oh, no, we still got 10 seconds. Wow, look at that. All right. Almost have everyone back. All right, I think we're gonna get rolling. Thank you all for going into breakout rooms. I'm sorry if I was a little confusing on the instructions for it. My bad. Yeah. So I hope that you had some really good conversations. We have some time now to kind of continue those conversations a little bit. And oh yeah, it looks like Zoom's been doing weird. Took everyone but 2 of them out. Yeah. So I would love to open up the space for conversation right now, whether that's sharing something that was brought up in your breakout room that you think it would be helpful for other people to hear. Maybe that's the best practice, or that's a question that your room was like completely stumped on and you want to see if anyone else in this space has it. So we've got about 10 minutes and I would love to just open it up. Feel free to unmute, raise your hand, drop in the chat. Space is open.
I wanted to share in our breakout room, we really, got a geography lesson of where Raymond, Washington, Forks, Squim, and other places are. The impacts of homelessness in rural communities and needing to rely on each other for resources. But our conversation around supporting unaccompanied youth who have custodial parents, biological parents still present, and how to navigate that. So very fruitful conversation on services for rural communities and unaccompanied youth.
Thanks for sharing, Marette. Does anyone else want to share what your group talked about?
Joey, this is Marilee. We had a good group. We were a little unclear kind of what to do, but so I jumped in. I think almost all of us gave a thumbs up to what I put in the chat. So often liaisons and districts are told that, what we need to do, how to interpret the guidance. But so often we also have to figure out how to make that work in our local district climate, culture, area. And certainly the interplay between McKinney-Vento money and Title I money comes into question then. And, if you talk to people from the state and federal government, McKinney-Vento funding is supposed to be like the icing on the cake, and the cake is Title I money in terms of serving our most impoverished or economically disadvantaged students. And one of the things that we're talking about right now is use of Title I money to pay for transportation to and from an extracurricular activity for a McKinney-Vento student. And when you get into that kind of a question, then your district CFO gets involved, and maybe even the district lawyer, in trying to interpret the Title I regulations. So we didn't all come up with an answer for that, but I put it in the chat that I think it'd be great if Building Changes and OSPI could co-host some training or discussion, create space for us to have these kind of discussions with Title I officials from OSPI. And that would help us in these kind of things that we're trying to figure out at the local level. Thank you.
I would love to echo that. I went to speak with my supervisor about funding because I'm brand new. I've only been in this position for about 20 days. And I was told point blank, Title I money pays for people, not things. And so I was super confused about that. And I was told, quote, I can pay for staff and I can buy curriculum, but I can't use I can't do anything else with Title I money.
I think Title I is just confusing, like over the board. Because when I worked in California for the school district, I was a Title I clerk, and I was called that because I was paid with Title I money, right? But when I came here, I was told the opposite, that they don't pay for people to be clerks that are Title I. So I think it's just confusing all around the board.
Yeah, definitely seeing an opportunity. I mean, for me to learn more about it as well, but to connect with OSPI, maybe we can reach out to even some of our more nationwide resources. I'm wondering if Schoolhouse Connection has any ideas on this too, and clarifying.
And I want to be really clear. I think most of the people I'm seeing on the screen, we're doing what we need to do, right? And we're advocating for the things we don't know, how they're going to get paid for, but we're advocating and saying, here it is in federal guidance, here it is in non-regulatory guidance. But yeah, just that whole question, it would be great. And then another, I think it was Michelle that said, it's also really important for us to know what the district itself identified as a priority for set aside money, because when a Title I director sets it aside, there has to be priorities identified, and so maybe we're not getting some things because it didn't come up in a needs assessment. So, and I work with a fabulous Title I director, by the way, and we're together exploring this. So thanks.
I just came in to try and say that would be a fabulous thing. It is Title I, and the technical assistance program through Title I at OSPI is a state fund. So it's something that we can arrange here. I also know some school districts that are doing incredible things with purchasing things with Title I funds. Now, they could argue that it's probably for schools whose their poverty level is above that 35% average. So you can probably get away with buying things versus the people, but the people are also involved. So I think a technical assistance on how to utilize that fund for McKinney-Vento would be great. I know in Seattle, we were using our Title I fund for one-on-one tutoring, and we would pay for teacher support. We would pay the teacher their additional hours, or the paraeducators. We provide things for athletic equipment or musical equipment and things like that. And those are things, right? Those are the materials that you purchase. But we also had MKV dollars to dabble into. We had an amazing budget person within our student support that navigated that for us too. So I think that's a great idea. And we'll go back to the drawing board and see how we can make that happen, and really identifying where that disconnect is, where you can't purchase items and things with Title I dollars, and bring school district leaders who have been able to do those things and how they're navigating it. So probably help you with tools that you can go back to your district leaders or your Title I and say, actually, this is allowable and is at the discretion of our districts and how we want to do that. So yeah, definitely something we can coordinate.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that, Maria, yeah, because we purchase a lot of things for our students. So I'm not understanding why they're not able to do that, because if the student needs it, then they need it, so yeah, that's a little new to me, but we purchase everything, like you said, tutoring, backpacks and stuff like that. I mean, glasses, things. So a lot of our families need things, so we have to purchase those things, because if not, then they won't have those things that they need. So I guess it's different for different districts and different schools. I don't know, but all I know is that if we have the funds to do it, then we'll go ahead and purchase those things if we could.
I just want to echo what Michelle just said in the chat, big versus little districts. We actually saw a decrease in our title money. And I get it when, title is paying for people in buildings working with kids. Title is doing, what it needs to do. And we have that set aside. I know that certainly, we have like a 30% free reduced lunch average compared to districts that are closer to 75, 80, 90%. And so our funding is limited. We can buy some of those things if we can justify it's a barrier to learning. But the big issue for us right now is transportation for extracurricular activities for McKinney-Vento. And that's seeming to be a sticking point right now. So, but thank you. These are great discussions. Thank you.
I do want to add, go ahead, Casey.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I am far from a title expert, but I believe Title IV funds are more mental, physical health. Somebody can correct me. That might be an avenue through Title IV too, if it's extracurricular. I mean, those are things you could justify as mental, physical health and well-being. So just a thought, possibly look into Title IV.
Maria, did you have any last thoughts before we start to wrap up for the day?
I was actually going to say what Casey mentioned is, if you're not able to tap into Title I, or you feel like your district or your region of schools are not high in poverty due to your free reduced lunch population, see what other funds are set aside and coming in to provide those services, and what are your district foundations or other ways that can kind of match those needs. And I was going to use an example of a school district we work with, but then I was like, we don't have enough time. But they are a smaller school district, but their budget CFO person at that district level knew how to navigate funding. Very small school district, probably one of the smaller ones in King County, but they knew how to redirect funding sources, buy gift cards, pay for housing supports. Granted, these were private dollars coming in through building changes through our schoolhouse partnership, but that was a small school district, but they knew how to navigate that because they had a very experienced accountant budget person in their administrative office. So that's what I'm thinking, that if we were to create this opportunity, bringing in district leaders at different size levels that we know are navigating this differently than what we know is actually happening.
I would say also too, if you're kind of stuck on questions, like what helps me sometimes, what I refer to is the NECE question Q&A, and I'll always go in there and see what they say, because 9 times out of 10, my answers in that frequently answered questions. So you can either go to their website and download that, and then that will also help you with your questions that you may have and get answers to as well.
Thank you. I think that, yeah, I dropped the link to that NACI FAQs earlier. That's one that I said hasn't been updated since 2017. And we're hoping for another update soon, but it's still extremely helpful information. Glad Antonius is agreeing with me on that and saying that it's really helpful. So we are gonna wrap it up. We've got about a minute left. So just real quick, while we are all together here, a couple of closing things. We have the please complete the survey, whether it is SurveyMonkey. So in general, if you're not seeking clock hours, do it through SurveyMonkey. If you're seeking clock hours, you're gonna have to do it through PD Enroller. Little confusing, I apologize for that. But the PD Enroller clock hour survey is required for the clock hours. And that attendance should be posted within a week. If anything gets weird on that, please just email me and I'll connect with our OSPI contact for that. We have the School Housing Network. Our first meeting is actually tomorrow at 1 p.m. It's on the third Thursdays of the month at 1 p.m. And this is a really great opportunity for, it's just a space that we hold every month for school and housing partners, right? School Housing Network. To get together and continue these conversations similar to what we've had today. It's an opportunity to ask questions of your peers, to make that connection, feel like you're in community with folks, as well as sometimes we'll, based on group need, we'll bring in different guest speakers, subject matter experts. So almost seeing that ask for like, okay, well, we need, what about that, the example that Maret was giving, and that district budget person who is really good. Maybe there's somebody we could reach out to and bring into a School Housing Network. So that link to the School Housing Network is in the chat. We also have 4 more trainings coming up this semester, serving specific student populations. McKinney-Vento data and storytelling. This one is new. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be showing how different districts are kind of tracking their student data and what they do with it. Going to be really cool. We'll have a lot of examples from different districts, navigating the housing system and school housing community partnership. And that is it for today. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And thank you for joining us. We'll hang around for a moment if anyone wants to connect.
What Thursday was that meeting? You said it's every...
Tomorrow, third Thursday of the month. And please use that link that Kayla dropped for the School Housing Network sign up. That'll take you to a Google form for you to kind of submit it. And then I'm going to make sure to go in and try and add everyone to the calendar invite today or tomorrow. But I do that on a monthly basis. And you can also just email me directly and I'll get you on it.
I forgot to say, it's good to see my old coworkers again, Kayla, Maret, good seeing you guys. Everybody else that got on this call. So just want to say, hey, good to see you guys again. Miss my old crew.
Love it.
Joey, do you know how many hours we're required to have each year?
I don't. I'm sorry. Does anyone in the space?
Hours for what?
It just said do the SurveyMonkey to